Another year, another state. The 50 state parks in Wisconsin may have the highest across-the-board standard I've seen for state parks yet. I've put the parks into tiers, regions, and ranked them all, so let's dive in. 50. Copper culture. The eastern half of Wisconsin did poorer than the western half of Wisconsin. Copper culture is 42 acres in Oconto, 40 minutes north of Green Bay. The park is mainly centered around a museum that wasn't open when I got there at 7 a.m. There was a short trail down by the Oconto River, but it was filled with mosquitoes and very unenjoyable. I only took 7 pictures here and spent most of my time running the trail due to the bugs. The combination of all those things sent this park to the bottom of the list. 49. Lizard Mound. Wisconsin's newest state park also happens to be one of its smallest and least exciting. In 2022, Washington County gave ownership of Lizard Mound County Park to the Wisconsin TNR, making it a state park. The park is 22 acres outside of West Bend. The park is a simple 1-mile trail weaving through the woods and around the many Indian mounds in the park, but it wasn't that exciting. Definitely an educational site, but as far as state parks go, it ranks near the bottom. 48. Heritage Hill. Heritage Hill State Park is sometimes called Heritage Hill State Historical Park. The site is 48 acres in the city of Alouez, a suburb of Green Bay. The main reason this one ranked so low is because it didn't really feel like a state park. There were no real natural features, and the park was centered mostly on replicas of historic buildings. The main trail in the park is simply a paved walking path through the historic town. While it was unique, the amount of people there and the lack of natural features led me to rank it near the bottom. 47. Lost Dauphin. Wisconsin's smallest state park is barely considered a state park. A short half-mile trail weaves through the woods in this 19-acre park, but other than that, a picnic shelter and swing set are the only other amenities of this park overlooking the Fox River. Brown County's state parks are really not that amazing given the fact that it has 2 of them and they both ranked in the bottom 5. 46. Buckhorn. The first park in the western half of the state, Buckhorn State Park, is Wisconsin's second largest state park at 6,900 acres. The park is ideal habitat for deer flies and mosquitoes, which is why it ranked so low. The landscape was unique and it definitely felt like a park though. Castle Rock Lake is the park's main attraction and is definitely popular with boaters, but as a hiker, the flat mosquito-ridden trails were not for me. 45. Brunette Island. Just outside of Cornell, Brunette Island State Park is 1,300 acres on the Chippewa River. The main reason this park ranked so low is because of how bad the bugs were. The ski trail was the worst with deer flies everywhere. Overall, the park had a nice atmosphere on the southern boundary of the Northern Lakes and Forests ecoregion, but the amount of bugs really did a number to it. 44. Bigfoot Beach. At the top of the F tier, Bigfoot Beach State Park on Lake Geneva is the embodiment of an unexciting park. I hiked a 3-mile loop through the woods here, and the only part that was even a little bit scenic was the area near the lagoon with the 2 bridges. With that being said, I have a feeling it is valuable for Wisconsin to have a state park on Lake Geneva due to its popularity with Chicagoans. The campground there was busy, and so was the town of Lake Geneva, but the park itself has no real unique features. 43. Governor Thompson. Just 15 miles from the Michigan border, Governor Thompson State Park was established in 2002, making it one of the newer state parks in the Wisconsin system. Bugs were a pretty big problem here, but not always. In many places the trail was wide enough to be exposed overhead, making for a sunny yet bug-free atmosphere. There was also lots of exposed rock at this park, and while there were no real cliffs, it was cool to be walking on the trail and just stumble upon the grass giving way to rocky ground. The tall pines and breaks in the trees for power lines allowed for amazing views as well. The park also has an overlook that is unmarked on the trail map, but has a fantastic view of Thunder Mountain, a hill southwest of the park. This park would rank much higher if it hadn't been for the bugs, and I enjoyed the variety of trails there. Governor Thompson is also the highest ranked park in the northeastern region of the state. 42. Lake Kegonsa. I visited most of the worst parks in the first half of my journey, making the second half all the better. Lake Kegonsa State Park was my second park, and it was a medium-sized park about half an hour south of Madison. This was the main park in southern Wisconsin where I had bug issues, but they still weren't that bad. Overall, the park was very unexciting with just some simple trails through the woods near the lake. I imagine the park is popular with boaters, but as a hiker, it was only okay. 41. Belmont Mound. Less than 20 miles from the Mississippi River, Belmont Mound rises to 1,405 feet above sea level. While the observation tower in the park has been demolished, the base of the mound still has amazing views since it has a gradual build-up to the park. Just west of Platteville, the 42-acre park is managed by the Belmont Lions Club. Nearby Platt Mound rises to an even higher height and has views that reach all the way to the Mississippi. Unfortunately, a combination of poor trail quality, poor trail signage, and a lack of a view at the top ended up sending this park to the bottom 10. 40. Lake Wissota. Outside of Chippewa Falls, Lake Wissota State Park is a little over 1,000 acres and is situated on the northeastern shore of Lake Wissota. One of the flattest parks, almost all of the elevation gain in the park is on the edge of the lake, making for easy hiking throughout. Mosquito patches were occasionally a problem here, but other than that, the park's rank is mainly caused by the lack of exciting natural features. It has lots of open space and waterfront, just none of it is notable or interesting. 39. Kinnickinnic. I'll be honest here, I was expecting better. Like, a lot better. Kinnickinnic State Park is the first of 4 state parks in the St. Croix Valley that nearly mirror the 4 Minnesota parks west of the river. The park is a large gorge that I thought I would get to see, but it turns out all the trails in the park just run through the grasslands in the park. The frontage on the St. Croix River is nice and there are a few cool views, but it ended up being a disappointment compared to my expectations. 38. Governor Nelson. Going back to the beginning of the summer, Governor Nelson State Park was the first state park I visited on my journey. It lies on Lake Mendota's northwestern shore, just across the lake from Madison. The park was a good park to start on because it kind of set the bar of what parks were going to be like, and most parks were far better than it. The prairies just off the eastern edge of the Driftless area were what gave the park its landscape, as well as its shore on Lake Mendota. Overall, I would probably visit again if I were in the Madison area for an extended period of time. 37. Aztalan. A half-hour east of Madison, Aztalan State Park is almost entirely grassland and is unique to the area. People have been living at this site for more than 10,000 years, and restored pyramids and fences mark the boundaries and features to this ancient town. With great views of the Crawfish River Valley, the park's 2 miles of trails mainly stay in the grass, but the northern part of the park has some wooded areas. The park really has nothing against it other than the wet grass since I showed up before 8 a.m. It simply wasn't as interesting as the parks higher on the list. 36. Merrick. One of the lowest ranking and lowest lying state parks in the Driftless area, Merrick State Park is a 320-acre park on the Mississippi River in Buffalo County that is centered around fishing. A couple of trails find their way through this park, and the section along the river really is quite scenic, but with tall pines lining the trail. Other than the large boat ramp and short trails, the park mainly functions as a campground on the Mississippi River. 35. Yellowstone Lake. This park's trail system was what put it lower. The park is called Yellowstone Lake, but only one of the trails runs near the lake. The rest run on the grassy hillsides on the north end of the park. The park has some okay views, but the wet grass and small amount of deer flies prevented this park from rising as high as it could. Nonetheless, I enjoyed my short hike, and the drive between the park and Madison is amazing. 34. New Glarus Woods. Another park in the southernmost row of counties, New Glarus Woods State Park lies just south of New Glarus and has a strong trail system with some good variety. The park is 430 acres of mostly wooded hillside, but some grassland areas make for some great views of the highway in town. Nothing remarkable here, but nothing too bad either, and the park would be a great place for a walk in the woods. 33. Lakeshore. Lakeshore is a unique state park that sits downtown Milwaukee. With fantastic views of the skyline, lake, and museums on the waterfront, the park is a short, mile-long walking path that goes around a green space. I had never been to a state park that had been formatted like a city park before, so this was a unique experience and I would definitely spend more time at Lakeshore. The paved walking path connects up to the other parks on the waterfront, and I walked all the way down to the end of Veterans Park. 32. Straight Lake. Returning to the west side of the state, Straight Lake State Park sits in Polk County just outside of the St. Croix Valley. As one of the highest flat parks in Wisconsin, the park rises to almost 1,400 feet above sea level in the thick forests that divide Minnesota and western Wisconsin. There were a lot of bugs here. This was the reason the park ranked so low. The trails were amazing and the entire forest was canopy style with minimal growth on the ground and lots of tall trees. I went here with my grandma and we did the whole 3-mile loop, which was enjoyable besides the bugs. Straight Lake is one of Wisconsin's newest state parks, established in 2002, and it seems like the Wisconsin DNR people have learned how to route trails really well, with these ones weaving all over the place through the glacial hills. I really would like to come back here in the fall when there's no bugs and lots of colors. I think this park would be one of the best ones in Wisconsin during that time. 31. Copper Falls. This is where the Wisconsinites will roast me. Of the northern 4 state parks, Copper Falls was the single one that ranked out of the top 10, and it was far down in the ranking. Copper Falls is one of Wisconsin's most popular state parks, and to see it this low may surprise some Wisconsin natives, but I stand my ground simply because of the bugs there. I think Copper Falls may have had the worst bugs of all the parks except Brunette Island, and I did 12 miles of hiking here, so they were a bother for more than 3 hours. Besides that, the 2 big falls areas on the Bad River were cool areas to walk around. Red Granite Falls had areas where I could climb on rocks, while the main Copper Falls area was more restrictive, but had more overlooks. Overall, the bugs were just too much, which sent this park far down on the list. 30. Hartman Creek. Isolated from a lot of the state parks in the system, Hartman Creek State Park straddles the border between Waupaca and Portage counties in central Wisconsin. Surprisingly, the bugs weren't a huge problem here, so the park's main reason for being so low is simply a lack of exciting features. My 9-mile hike here showcased the many types of forests that lie in this part of Wisconsin, and this was the first park on my journey to be in the north-central hardwood forests region of the state. The park's landscape is defined by the 7 lakes that lie within it. However, my hike hardly took me near any of them, which was a little disappointing. Nonetheless, the park was pretty enjoyable across the board, putting it in the top 30. 29. Cross Plains. Just west of Madison, Cross Plains State Park was the first park I visited in the Driftless area. The park is not well known as a state park, but the part of the land that it sits on is called the Ice Age Complex, and it is one of the main visitor centers for the Ice Age Trail. I hiked 3 miles here through bottomland prairies and hillside forests, and the random limestone rock outcrops everywhere made it feel like somewhere other than the Midwest. Aside from that, the 1,500-acre park wasn't super remarkable, just a nice walk in the woods. 28. Council Grounds. One of the most isolated state parks in Wisconsin's system, Council Grounds State Park lies just west of Merrill in southern Lincoln County. At 509 acres, it is far from the largest park in Wisconsin's system, but it shows the boundary between eastern temperate forests and northern forests really well. I hiked just under 6 miles here, and the most exciting part was along the Wisconsin River. The north side of the park is dammed to make a large lake, while south of the dam, the river's banks are short rocky cliffs, not what I expected for north-central Wisconsin. I would rank this park much higher if it didn't have so many bugs as well. Bugs are kind of a given because of the park's location, though. 27. Natural Bridge. 40 minutes north of Madison, Natural Bridge State Park is a small wooded park split by a grassland valley in the middle. With only a few miles of trails, the park is not well known and seems to be a hidden gem. The only evidence of humans at this small park is the small parking lot and information kiosk at the entrance. Other than that, the trails are not well trafficked, and they need a little off the top, too. I also waded chest deep into grassland because the trail was not clearly marked. The bridge lived up to expectations and kind of comes out of nowhere on the trail. The park's trail conditions and its size were what prevented it from making the top half. 26. Tower Hill. Another small park, Tower Hill State Park is located in Iowa County, almost directly on the Wisconsin River. The park only has 2 miles of trails which mainly weave around the shot tower in the park. Lead miners and manufacturers ran this shot tower during the 20th century to create lead shots for companies that needed them. Creating these shots required dropping liquid lead down a long vertical chute into water, and it would solidify into balls or shots as it descended. People would collect the shots at the bottom and ship them out. The shot tower still stands and has a number of open-air exhibits inside of it, as well as a great overlook of the river valley. Below the tower, sandstone cliffs line the trail as I climbed from the valley. Definitely a cool spot that gets overshadowed by some of the other parks in Taliesin, which are also in the area. It has a small campground that probably doesn't get much use, which can be good or bad. 25. Mill Bluff. Entering the top half, Mill Bluff State Park straddles the border between Monroe and Juneau counties and also straddles Interstate 90 and 94. The park's trails are very fragmented, which is why it fell a little from the top 20, with you having to walk 3/4 of a mile along a road to get between trail systems. That and the deer flies were terrible on the north side of the park. Aside from that, the park has a prehistoric atmosphere which was cool to experience with sparse trees and tall rocky outcroppings. The overlook from Mill Bluff was also amazing. 24. Rocky Arbor. Another park that partially lies in Juneau County, Rocky Arbor State Park sits just north of Wisconsin Dells and gets overshadowed by all the other things to do there. The park has a short 2-mile trail that is filled with tall pines and craggy sandstone rocks. I hiked this park with my mom and grandma and they both enjoyed it as well. Other than that, I don't have much to say. Good park, would recommend. 23. Mirror Lake. A 2,200-acre park in Sac County, Mirror Lake State Park has many miles of trails that go through sparse and thick forests. Mirror Lake itself is man-made out of Dell Creek, and the park is a popular place in the Wisconsin Dells area. I hiked the full 12-mile loop here, and the biggest thing preventing Mirror Lake from making the top 20 was the deer flies on the south side of the park. The forest was just sparse enough to make them a problem since they like the areas that are partly sunny and partly shady. Nonetheless, big rock outcrops along the lake and deep ravines on the north side of the park really did it well, putting it in the top half. 22. Roche-Cry. Just north of Adams, Roche-Cry State Park is the only state park in Adams County. The trails away from the mound aren't super impressive, which is why the park isn't in the top 20, but the stairway to get to the top of the mound was awe-inspiring, and the top of the mound reminded me of the Black Hills with tall pines and large boulders. At the bottom of the mound, the petroglyphs carved into the rock are a unique feature of the park as well, and the tall trees continue to remind me of out west, Northern California this time. It was also nice to finally use Interstate 39, which I hadn't used at all until Roche-Cry, my 44th park. 21. Governor Dodge. I might get grilled for this one, but the loop I did in the park didn't sell me as much as I thought the park would. Governor Dodge State Park is one of Wisconsin's largest at over 5,200 acres in Iowa County. The trail that I did simply consisted of the outer horse trail loop, which I didn't find that exciting, but there were some nice views of the lakes, and going through the campground surrounded by tall bluffs was cool too. I made a short detour to Stevens Falls, which was definitely worth it. Overall, though, I think this park got the short end of the stick in terms of the hike that I did, but 21st is still respectable. 20. Wildcat Mountain. The hike that I did at Wildcat Mountain was similar to Governor Dodge, a large outer loop totaling over 14 miles. The trails here were more interesting though, going up and down through the forested hills and on the edge of farmland. The park also didn't meet expectations, however, with the only real overlooks being on the west side of the park, the rest just being breaks in the trees. Overall though, I would say that those western overlooks were what pushed Wildcat Mountain into the top 20. 19. Willow River. Just a short drive outside of the Twin Cities, Willow River State Park is very popular with people who live there. Willow River is just one of 2 Wisconsin state parks that have special rates for out-of-staters because it's so popular with Minnesotans. Interfalls Lake is the main body of water in this park, and I hiked 9 miles all the way around it. My grandma hiked the south side of the lake with me, then she hiked back to the falls while I did the north side of the lake. The Willow River Gorge is truly the centerpiece to this park, though, with high overlooks overviewing the rushing water all the way to Willow Falls, which is very wide and has a high discharge. Willow Falls was what pushed this park into the top 20, with it being top 5 at the time I visited it. 18. Whitefish Dunes. The first Door County park I'm discussing, Whitefish Dunes State Park, is 600 acres on the Lake Michigan side of Door County. The park's size and landscape were what led it to rank as the lowest park in Door County, but at rank 18, that'll give you an idea of how consistent the region is. I hiked 6.6 miles here, and tall pines, rocky shoreline, and sandy beaches were some of the best landscapes I walked through here. Whitefish Dunes State Park also connects to Cave Point County Park, which is popular with paddlers and swimmers. More people know about Cave Point than they do about Whitefish Dunes. The dune landscape was interesting, but another dune park outdid Whitefish, which led me to put it 18th. 17. Nelson Dewey. In the opposite corner of the state, Wisconsin's southwesternmost state park is small but a gem. Nelson Dewey State Park is 750 acres in Grant County, but only has a little over 2 miles of trails. These 2 miles of trails are the best they could possibly be, though, with over half of them following the last ridge overlooking the Mississippi River. Despite being in the driftless area, much of the front bluff is a prairie landscape with rocks scattered throughout. The park has many similarities to Waubonsee State Park in Iowa, which was my favorite. Both are the southwesternmost parks in their state. Both consist of grassland ridges overlooking some of the largest river valleys in the U.S., and both have 2-mile trail loops. Some of the hike and campsites are on platforms that directly overlook the river, which would be an amazing spot to spend the night. Nelson Dewey probably gets overshadowed by some of the other parks on the Mississippi, which you will hear about later. 16. Interstate. For those of you who watch my Minnesota video, this name might seem familiar, and it might make sense too. Interstate State Park, sometimes just called Interstate Park, is split between the states of Minnesota and Wisconsin on the St. Croix River. To give you a sense of how good the parks are in Wisconsin compared to Minnesota, Minnesota's Interstate Park ranked 13th out of 66 parks, while Wisconsin's much larger Interstate Park ranked 16th out of 50 parks. This park's landscape is characterized by the large boulders, cliffs, and pine forests that make it seem like the North Woods, yet somehow you are just 40 minutes from St. Paul. Of the 4 Wisconsin parks on the St. Croix River, this was the highest ranked despite having mosquitoes, narrowly edging out Willow River, which didn't. Something many don't know is that one pass from either state, Minnesota or Wisconsin, will allow you to visit both sides of the park. I hiked 6 miles here with my grandma doing the outer loop of trails. Overall, I highly recommend this park to people who live in the Twin Cities. 15. Peninsula. This rank might come as a surprise to most Wisconsinites or people who visit Door County frequently, but Peninsula ranked 15th because of the crowds. I just couldn't get away from them. The weather likely also contributed to my ranking because it was a calm, overcast day, so no blue water and no waves. Those 2 things really kept the park out of the top 10, but I really loved it there, especially in places where there weren't tons of people. The Overlook Tower was completely swamped, which was disappointing, but I did some of the mountain bike trails on the south side of the park, which were very pleasant and sparsely populated. Peninsula State Park is the largest state park in Door County at 3,700 acres and sits between 2 significant tourist towns, Fish Creek and Ephraim. With that being said, people were doing all sorts of activities at this park, from hiking to biking to boating to many more activities in the campground community areas. Peninsula is also the other park in Wisconsin that charges special rates for out-of-staters, since Door County is a popular place for Chicagoans to take a vacation. 14. High Cliff. At the bottom of the A tier, High Cliff State Park is Wisconsin's sole state park on Lake Winnebago. With over 15 miles of trails and tons of amazing views, this park easily ranked in my top 5 when I visited. After visiting more than 30 more parks, it dropped a bit, but still ranks in the top 15. Living up to its name, High Cliff State Park is centered around the edge of the Niagara Escarpment, which is a rocky formation that extends to the east through the Great Lakes. An observation tower sits at the north end of the park near the marina, and the trails weave through canopy-style forests. Reaching the cliff face was obviously my favorite part, though, with the stairway between the large rocks. I hiked almost 8 miles here, and the best trails are definitely along the cliff. It has also been a while since I've said something like this, but High Cliff is the highest ranked state park in the Lake Winnebago region of Wisconsin. 13. Kohler-André. Just south of Sheboygan, Kohler-André State Park is made up of a set of dunes on Lake Michigan. As the 8th park I visited out of 50, it prepared me well for the scenery I was going to experience later on in the journey. I hiked just under 5 miles through wetlands, pine forests, and dune grasslands. The Cordwalk is the main selling point of this park, and is the most popular trail there. Fenced in with ropes and posts, the Cordwalk goes right through the dunes of Kohler-André, which really sold the park for me. Not only that, but the park's beach is fully packed near the water, meaning that you could walk from end to end in the park, which I did. Of the 8 parks on Lake Michigan, Door County has 5 and the rest of the state has 3. But in terms of scenery, they are all very comparable, with the only outlier being Lakeshore, downtown Milwaukee. Aside from Lakeshore, all of the parks ranked in the top 20, and 6 of the 7 made the top 15, showing that Lake Michigan is one of the best outdoor areas in Wisconsin. 12. Newport. Our third Door County park of 5, Newport State Park, is located right at the end of the Door Peninsula. The park is over 2,000 acres of mostly flat forest along Lake Michigan. The shore immediately along the lake alternates between sandy beach and low rocky cliffs and beaches, which made my hike along the shoreline very unique and interesting. There were people here, but not as many as at Peninsula, which led the park to rank higher. The only thing that held the park back was how wet the grassland was after the previous day's rain. My shoes were soaked all the way through by the time I got back into the woods. Luckily, this was at the beginning of my hike, so that faded from my memory quickly. The large park allowed me to do a 17-mile loop from end to end of the park, and there were several highlights, mostly along the shoreline. I think the most underrated part of the park is the section of dunes north of Europe Bay Road. 11. Blue Mound. One of the highest points in Wisconsin is Blue Mound, which is in Iowa County 40 minutes west of Madison. As someone who enjoys great views, Blue Mound State Park almost ranking in the top 10 didn't surprise me at all. With 2 observation towers, one looking west and one looking east, the mound is large and has a big lawn on top of it. This lawn makes it seem like you aren't 500 feet above the surrounding farmland, but if you go outside of the road, you can see sweeping views of the Wisconsin Valley to the north and the Savannah section to the south. I hiked over 6 miles here, checking out both observation towers and the Weeping Rock Trail on the east side of the park, which runs through a rocky ravine. The mound rises to 1,716 feet above sea level, which is unheard of in this area not far from the Mississippi River. Blue Mound itself makes the drive to Madison much more enjoyable as well, since it's impossible to miss rising out of the farmland just a few miles north of U.S. Highway 151. 10. Pattison. We enter the top 10 with Wisconsin's northwesternmost state park. Pattison State Park is 20 minutes south of Superior and features the highest waterfall in any of the 4 states that I've done so far. The Nemadji River plummets 165 feet just north of Interfalls Lake to create Big Manitou Falls. Not only that, but Little Manitou Falls is another 30-foot waterfall that exists at the south end of the park. There were far less mosquitoes here than I expected, which was amazing. Bug spray was definitely necessary, but they weren't a huge bother during my 7-mile hike. The trails along the river are very well kept and made of gravel, while the trails on the southeast side of the park are made of grass. Those were the roughest areas, but even with minor setbacks, this park cracks the top 5th of Wisconsin state parks. 9. Perot. One of the final parks in the Driftless area, Perot State Park consists of 9 named peaks that are separate from the rest of the Driftless area. These peaks were isolated due to a glacial river created during the last glaciation. Rising nearly 600 feet above the river, the park's views of Minnesota and the Mississippi were the best in Wisconsin. The Brady's Bluff Trail was a real highlight for me. The grasslands on Brady's Bluff allow you to see the river throughout your hike on the way up and down, and there's a shelter at the top. Other than that, I don't have much to say about this park. It's a really cool spot along the Mississippi River just north of La Crosse that both Minnesotans and Wisconsinites should check out. 8. Amnicon Falls. The Northern Four, as I call them, are heavy in the top 10. Amnicon Falls probably has the best accessibility to good scenery out of the 4 parks, with 10 waterfalls in a 1-mile loop. When I went to Pattison the day before, I thought that Amnicon Falls would easily rank below it because of its size and trail mileage. While only having half the trail mileage of Pattison, the scenery was so much better with waterfalls of all shapes and sizes scattered throughout the park. The park was also the closest park to Superior and Duluth, and I only had to drive 10 minutes to get there. Overall, this park heavily exceeded my expectations and landed a spot in the top 10 because of it. 7. Potawatomi. Moving back over to Door County, the closest park to Green Bay and Sturgeon Bay is also one of the county's best. Potawatomi State Park has a wonderful 6-mile trail loop that I hiked through the woods and along the rocky shores of Green Bay. Even though the observation tower was closed for maintenance, there were still great views of the community of Idlewild off the north end of the park. When I rounded the north end of the park to do the trail along the shoreline, I was blown away though. 11-mile-per-hour winds out of the north sent waves crashing ashore at decent speeds, making my hike even more exciting. I think there was also a little bit of bias here since this was the first park I did after finishing the mosquito-infested north-central part of the state. 6. Rock Island. Entering the S tier, Rock Island State Park is the best state park in Door County. While Door County had no parks in the top 5, they very consistently ranked in or near the top 15, making it a good region to visit in terms of number of outdoor destinations. While it was the best state park in Door County, it was also the most expensive for me to visit in all of Wisconsin, with the ferries costing me $58 round trip to get out to the island. The park is unique in that it's the only Wisconsin state park to not allow any vehicles, so while you may take your car from the mainland to Washington Island, the ferry to Rock Island is for people only, and you must park your car in the lot on the northeast side of Washington Island. I hiked 6 miles past lighthouses, cliffs, and turquoise waters, which really made this park stand out, not to mention that you had to travel over water twice to get there. This was really exciting for me because I'm literally from the state that's the furthest away from any ocean in North America. Something else to note is that the park is the highest ranked Wisconsin state park on Google Maps, with it the only park to receive a 4.9. Overall, if you're headed to Door County, a day trip to Rock Island should be on your list. 5. Harrington Beach. While Rock Island is the best state park in Door County, it's actually not the best Wisconsin state park on Lake Michigan's shore. That title goes to Harrington Beach State Park, 40 minutes north of Milwaukee. A few things had to come together for this park to rank higher than all the Door County parks. First, it was dead quiet here, not a soul to be seen anywhere in the park. Second, this was the first real state park I did on the Lake Michigan shore, with the rest, excluding Lakeshore, being inland and in the relatively boring southeastern part of the state. And finally, and most importantly, this was the most imposing weather I had on any of the park days this summer, and I loved it. With temperatures holding at 45 degrees and sustained 23-mile-an-hour winds, Lake Michigan was absolutely roaring with waves that day, and I was living for it. While most would say that the extensive beach and shoreline along the lake is the best part of the park, I wouldn't even say that. The Quarry Lake was my favorite part of this park, with clear bluish-green water allowing you to see deep down to the many limestone ledges of the underground quarry. Not only that, but you can see some of the old ruins from the man-made structures of the quarry, with wooden frames being visible from the lake's bridge. I'm not even done. The Quarry Lake has a waterfall on the north side that the park doesn't advertise, and it was a pleasant surprise when I came across it. It's not big or easily visible, with it quickly dropping off the limestone ledge into the deep lake, but it was a cool feature. The final point that the park scored was its variety of landscapes. From a grassland prairie atop the hill to heavily wooded lowlands on the south side of the park, to sandy beaches, rocky points, a wetland boardwalk, rocky quarry, deep lake, bridge, and waterfall, this park literally has everything. Harrington Beach State Park is the best-ranked state park in the southeastern Wisconsin region of the state. 4. Big Bay. This was the final park I visited, 50 out of 50. It's also the second of 2 parks to require overwater travel to access. Big Bay State Park is located on Madeline Island, the only developed island of the Apostle Islands. The park takes up 20% of the island and has a large variety of landscapes which really sent it up the ranking. As Wisconsin's only state park on Lake Superior, the park is the only park of the Northern Four not to have waterfalls, but it makes up for it with literally everything else. I hiked an 8-mile loop here, and it had everything I could have wanted. I started with the Lagoon Ridge Trail, which does exist, even though it isn't on most maps of the park. This trail takes you through the least developed regions of the park and on the west side of the large lagoon in the park. From there, after a short segment in Big Bay Town Park, I re-entered the state park on the Barrier Beach side, which has a boardwalk through a pine forest. We saw sandhill cranes wandering the beach, which was long enough for every group to have an isolated spot. After hiking the length of the boardwalk in Barrier Beach, we hiked out to the point, which gradually gets rockier and rockier the further you go. The red quartzite unique to the Apostle Islands really complemented the bright blue water of Lake Superior, which was super clear. The section of trail along the point is full of places to stop and go out on the rocks, which I enjoyed. Finally, on our short hike through the woods back to the car, we dispelled any doubts of there not being bears in the Apostle Islands, with one running away from us, me, my mom, and my grandparents, as we went through the woods. That was a fun end to the journey, but I really didn't expect Big Bay to be a top 5 park, but here we are. Big Bay State Park is the highest ranked state park in the North Woods region of Wisconsin. 3. Rib Mountain. In the number 3 spot is a park I have a long history with. Rib Mountain State Park is located in Marathon County outside of Wausau, which is where a lot of my extended family lives. Rib Mountain is the second most prominent peak in Wisconsin after Blue Mound and rises 1,925 feet above sea level. This is 700 feet above the Wisconsin River and 600 feet above the surrounding farmland. I hiked 8 miles here in the form of 3 interconnected loops. While the park had some mosquitoes, the different areas and landscapes of the park made up for that, and the quarry on the west side of the park really took it above and beyond. People write things in the rocks in the quarry, which is fun to occasionally see. The observation tower had great views as always, despite the smoky conditions, and the park was reasonably quiet. Rib Mountain stayed in the number 1 spot for the longest of any park on my journey. I visited the park 15th out of 50, and it held the number 1 spot for 21 parks before being overtaken. Rib Mountain is Wisconsin's highest state park and is the highest ranked park in the north-central Wisconsin region of the state. 2. Wyalusing. I expected Wyalusing to be in the top 15 when I started, but was even happier than I could have imagined with my park experience. Wyalusing State Park is 2,800 acres at the confluence of the Wisconsin and Mississippi rivers in Grant County. If you thought Harrington Beach had everything, this park arguably took it up a notch. While the park has no lake, the trails go through every landscape imaginable, from hilltop prairies, deciduous and coniferous forests, bottomlands, and more. While there were less features than Harrington Beach, the park's volume was really what took it over the top. The trail loop that I hiked was over 16 miles through every landscape in the park, which really helped the park out. After hiking up the road and through the grassland, which were the most boring parts of my hike, I entered the Sand Cave Trail, which featured multiple waterfall caves that were flowing due to the on and off rain that day. The hike along the river was unique as well, since most of the state parks on the Driftless Mississippi don't allow you to hike right next to the main channel of the river, but this one does. After climbing some scenic switchbacks, I reached the top of Wisconsin Ridge, and the overlook, despite being rainy, was amazing. I continued along the bluff only to descend one more time down a steep trail with multiple staircases. I came back up and hiked along the Mississippi Ridge Trail to complete my large loop. Overall, Wyalusing is the lesser-known but much better version of Pikes Peak State Park in Iowa, and I really hope I have the chance to go back there soon. Wyalusing is the highest ranked park in the southern Driftless area region of Wisconsin. 1. Devil's Lake. For the second year in a row, I predicted my number 1 park right from the start, and unlike last year, this year it was not close. Devil's Lake State Park is Wisconsin's largest state park at over 10,000 acres in Sac County. It is also the most popular state park I've ever been to based on the amount of Google reviews, which total over 11,000. I hiked 12 miles here doing nearly every trail in the park, and despite the smoky conditions, the views were amazing and the trails stayed incredibly unique throughout. I especially liked the sections that descended the South Bluff with steep stairs and narrow paved paths. The Devil's Doorway was bigger than I expected it to be, and I would call it the Delicate Arch of the Midwest. Obviously Devil's Lake was crowded, but I made sure to show up at 6 a.m. sharp to avoid as much of that as possible. Devil's Lake is also Wisconsin's third highest state park, with elevations peaking at 1,566 feet above sea level. Anyone who is familiar with Wisconsin knows the geographic features of Devil's Lake State Park, and if you aren't, you can see from the pictures that the park is centered around an oval-shaped lake with 500-foot bluffs on the east and west sides. Devil's Lake State Park is the highest-ranked park in the northern Driftless area region of Wisconsin and is a well-known and well-loved outdoor location for nearly all Wisconsinites. So that's it. 4 states down, 46 to go. Thanks for watching and listening to my thoughts, and be sure to share your thoughts in the comments. I love having discussions about the parks. Hopefully this encourages you to explore more.